process for the appointment of Peter Mandelson for a very short time. So I think probably basically December to mid-January. But can I just take you back to a few months prior to that? Before Donald Trump was elected president, we've got Karen Pierce, who's the ambassador in the United States, a very experienced ambassador, popular with the Biden team and with the Trump team as well. We've got an internal candidate who's been there's been a process for getting a replacement for Karen Pierce when she steps down, I believe.
So, as I think is clear from Lord Case's advice to the Prime Minister,
yes,
revealed in the papers given to the humble address, the last government decided in the first part of 2024 to hold an internal competition for to find a replacement for Dame Karen, and that individual was recommended at the end of that process, but in the end it wasn't taken forward because the general election was called and the appointment process was frozen under the rules that apply on significant decisions during an election period. So it was.
Oh, I see. I didn't realise it was pre-election. Right.
It was before the election.
Okay, cool. So let's go to late summer, early September. What discussions were taking place about an alternative candidate then?
I wasn't involved in any discussions at that point.
Right, and then 2 months later, we have Peter Mandelson announced as ambassador to the United States. Were you? I mean, at what stage were you involved in any discussions?
Yeah, no, good question, Jay. I was first involved when I was in mid-December told of the Prime Minister's decision to make a political appointment as ambassador, and that political appointment was Peter Mandelson. So that was when I was first involved. It was, if I recall right, the 15th of December, so the beginning of the week that ended with his announcement.
Okay, and then from the first tranche of the humble address papers, we've seen that between November the 11th and December the 11th, the Prime Minister's PPS and Private Secretary for the Foreign Office give advice. We see the then Cabinet Secretary, Sir Simon Case, give his advice, and we see the due diligence carried out by the Cabinet Office, but we don't see advice from you. I mean, it may be for members of the public. That seems surprising that you're not... That, you know, were you ever asked your opinion about appointing Peter Mandelson as ambassador? I mean, you were in charge of the Foreign Office.
The first I was aware of the decision was when I was told on the 15th of December. The first I was aware of the advice that had gone to the Prime Minister, or indeed that it was being formulated, was when I read it in the humble address release papers. I wasn't involved. I wasn't told a decision was coming.
Would you have expected to?
I think it is, well, I think two things on it. I think one is, on the face of it, it is reasonable for the head of the Foreign Office to be involved in thinking around what is our major top bilateral ambassador post. On the other hand, given clearly the Prime Minister was deciding to make a political appointment, I think it is also reasonable that civil servants would not be directly involved in discussions around what is a political appointment, because in the end that is a matter for elected politicians, and I can also see the sensitivity. So I'm a bit conflicted. I mean, clearly, I think ideally you want to have a situation where there is a tight and small circle of people who can be consulted on a big decision like this on a basis of trust. But I can also see that in the end it was a political matter. And I suspect, but I have no knowledge of this, was discussed in political circles at the top of the government.
In a circle of trust, do you think you'd have a place?
Look, not in a political conversation, no. But in the end, this is an appointment to the most senior job in our foreign service. I was head of the diplomatic service, so I think it is possible, without asking me as a civil servant or any head of the diplomatic service, I think it is possible for them to be involved in a conversation, for example, around what are the requirements? What does the UK need in the period ahead, and that sort of thing. Even if that isn't, you're not then involved in the absolute decision-making discussions around individuals who are politicians, because it's a political appointment.
John.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just follow up one or two of the questions from the Chair? You said that the process had been underway for an internal competition, but come the general election, it was frozen. Once the new government had been elected, was the process not then recommenced?
Well, I wasn't involved, as I said, so I don't know whether that was considered very much. Obviously, you have seen the then Cabinet Secretary's advice on that, and that's all I know about it, is that advice.
The Foreign Office must have been continuing to look at potential candidates to replace Karen Pierce.
The view Karen Pierce had basically been agreed formally, as the notes say, to stay until January 2025. I took the view that actually what made most sense was to know the outcome of both the UK general election, but also the US presidential elections. And obviously there was, until the election was called, there was an uncertainty around the timing of the UK general election, given our political system, with an end point of January 2025. Karen and I had discussed, therefore, whether or not, if required, she'd be willing to stay a bit longer while we were able to see how those two elections played out, as it were. So there was flexibility. So to answer your question, in terms of September of 2024, that was before we knew the outcome of the US elections. The new government was only just in, so the FCDO and I were not actively looking at that point for candidates, because I felt we had time to see the outcome of the US elections, and Karen had shown flexibility over exactly when she ended in the beginning part of 2025.
And when were you first told that it was likely to be a political appointment?
When I was told of the Prime Minister's decision.
15th of December?
Yes.
Until the 15th of December, you had no information that any discussion had taken place, or certainly that a decision had been reached?
No.
And when you were told that a decision had been reached and it was Peter Mandelson, did you express any concerns about that? I was,
as I say, I was told of a decision, so I wasn't asked for advice. I was told a due diligence process had been carried out, and I think this is known now, as the Prime Minister had been made aware of the risks and had accepted those risks and decided to proceed. So I then moved on to a conversation, was asked for advice on the practical steps required to meet what was the Prime Minister's decision, and then the requirement around the timescale.
You say the Prime Minister had been made aware of the risks, but he hadn't, because the developed vetting hadn't been carried out. So all that had taken place was the due diligence. Did you ask whether or not developed vetting had been taken out or had taken place?
It was clear at that point that vetting had not taken place. It was clear to me at that point the step that had taken place was due diligence, not vetting.
Can I just ask you, do you remember who it was that was telling you these things?
I had a conversation with the private secretary in number 10. Right.
And did you express a view as to whether or not developed vetting should take place before an announcement?
Yeah. So on that, later that week, as we were taking forward the practical steps required, the Cabinet Office initially said that as Mandelson was, to use the technical phrase from the guidance, a fit and proper person as a member of the House of Lords, he did not require developed vetting. I mean, to be honest with you, I thought that was odd and insufficient. I'd been Deputy Ambassador in Washington and therefore occasionally chargé, and I knew very well to do the job effectively, you have to be party to some of the deepest secrets that the UK government holds. But I also recognised that the situation was unusual, and I therefore asked for advice, although I was pretty clear in my own mind, from the SCDO security team They came back to me after discussions with the Cabinet Office and said that their advice was that he should have DV, and I absolutely agreed with that. And by then the Cabinet Office had reflected further, and they also agreed. And that, if I remember right, that conversation started at the back end of the week of the 16th of December, at the time that the public announcement was made, and then by the beginning of the following week, just before Christmas, it was clear that that was going to be the requirement. That's what I'd thought, as it were, and I endorsed the advice. And at that point, Mandelson was sent the forms that you need to fill in to kick off the whole process.
I mean, we have had a bit of a he said, she said on this. We've got the Cabinet Office saying that the Foreign Office asked, does he really need DV? And the Cabinet Office saying that the Foreign Office asked, does he really need DV? But you're down on the Foreign Office's side, that it was the Cabinet Office that said it first.
Look, I can't promise you who said what first.
Right.
I know what I was told. I was told the Cabinet Office suggested he didn't require DV. There clearly, self-evidently, was some further back and forth and consideration. And, I don't want to give you an impression that when we were taking forward the DV, there were people in the centre still saying, don't do that. By the beginning of the following week, everyone was agreed that he should have DV, and therefore it was now about taking that process forward. But I've given you my account of my memory of what I heard and what I thought at the time.
One thing is for sure, nobody made a note of it.
In the end, these are about practical arrangements rather than things which, are under, Chair, I know you've talked in previous hearings about civil servants writing everything down, but I also agree with those who've said to the committee that actually, if you're going to get work done, you simply cannot and do not have time to record every interaction. The key thing is, what was the decision? The decision was he required DV, and that is recorded.
So the decision was he required DV. That was your view. It was the view of the Foreign Office Security Department. Yet we know that prior to his obtaining DV clearance, he was given access to information which would usually require DV to have been completed. So how did that come about?
So you had I can't remember if it's 7 or 8 pages, but it's certainly lengthy and thorough response from the FCDO yesterday. You sent them a very long, not very long, I don't mean that in a critical way, a list of questions. I didn't mean long in a critical way. A list of questions, and they're very good questions. I think there are good answers in the FCDO's response. I recognise them from the consideration of the time. The context I was going to share on this point is you have a publicly announced ambassador designate to do the single most important ambassador job for the UK. You have a very, very compressed timescale you're being asked to meet for them to start their role in Washington. And you have the exceptional circumstances of an incoming Trump administration and a very high premium, therefore, in the new ambassador arriving as well briefed as possible in the short time available, recognising that normally ambassadors have several months to prepare for big jobs like this. And that required Mandelson to have access to briefings and papers to allow him to be properly prepared. And so, as reflected in what the Foreign Office said to you in the note last night, a decision was taken in line with the guidance that he should be given access to the building and access to the paperwork, in particular on, for example, the UK government's preparations and policies towards an incoming administration. And I was given that advice and I endorsed it, and I signed off on it. And I think it was the right thing to do to make sure that, as I say, the Prime Minister's choice for ambassador was properly prepared when he started his job. I think it would be very odd not to do that.
It does look odd, though, because he's got a green pass, which means that he's got DV. And he had a DV pass on the very day that, according to the DV people, he should be recommended to not get DV. So on the day that Ollie Robbins is making his decision that it's borderline, Mandelson is wandering around the Foreign Office with a DV pass. There's a photograph of him going into the Foreign Office on that day.